that. I says, you're talking to somebody that's been in politics for 30 years. We've spun everything in my lifetime. I said, we've made manure look good.
The Genesee Theater in Waukegan, Illinois. Beautifully restored and reopened in 2004. It now sits empty more than 300 nights a year. The restoration cost taxpayers $24 million for the theater and $8.5 million for the parking ramp, for a total of $32.5 million.
This thing was going to be bigger than life. Every inch of that place was designed for a purpose to support this master plan, to ultimately just be a people pump, an economic generator. Hadn't do so much with theater and what's on the stage. It was how we would make sure that people would come back over and over and over, and we can fill the houses to have a regular flow of people in downtown Waukegan.
Spent a lot of time just thinking it through, and that's real important to come up with a concept. This building had no anchor use, and a theater has to develop an anchor use, and our anchor use here are 3 6-week seasons of variety entertainment.
The restoration story began in 1998 when a small group of activists would have local aldermen meet them at the downtown theater at 7 o'clock.
And we'd walk outside and say, there's nothing happening here, and then beckon to behind us to say, and you have this huge theater just sitting here with seats that we can fill.
After small successes acquiring the funding for a study, Theater Projects Consultants and Web Management Services presented the city with its first renovation study. The estimated cost? $25 million. In October of 1999, the Genesee Restoration Committee is formed. After reading an article about the theater group's efforts, Ray Shepardson called to offer the city a second opinion.
Ray was one of the most interesting characters that I've ever met.
He's crazy. He was somewhat eccentric.
Ray Shepardson is a genius.
Following a grueling 7-year run of presenting 200 to 300 performances each year before the theaters were fully restored, Ray went on to play starring roles in theater restoration projects in Columbus, Detroit, St. Louis, and has consulted on more than 35 major restoration projects all over the country.
Ray Shepardson had created a legacy of beautifully restored theaters around the nation. His genius wasn't simply restoring these old, majestic landmarks. Ray had a history of making them work after they were restored, giving them purpose so they revitalized the communities in which they stood. Millions of people around the country experience his legacy as they celebrate imagination in these historic treasures. He saw the theaters as an economic tool that communities could use to bring life back to areas that had been abandoned for decades. After researching the surrounding area, Ray proposed an anchor use of 3 6-week seasons, giving the theater 144 anchor performances a year. The operation would be a $20 million a year business, using subscriptions as a powerful marketing tool. The original startup cost was around $3 million. The Restoration Committee convinces State Senator Terry Link to help find the funds to do a major project analysis that eventually wins the approval of city government, which then votes to sell general obligation bonds for the restoration of the theater. On July 3, 2001, the city of Waukegan contracts with GSI Architects. Ray Shepardson's duties include restoration consulting and operating guidance. The wages and scope of work are clearly outlined in the contract. Phase 1 of the restoration begins. In February of 2002, with the restoration well underway, State Senator Terry Link joins the newly created Friends of the historic Genesee Theater Board of Directors. Their combined experience in theatrical operation is none. The board was chosen for their presumed fundraising abilities. Their primary role was to raise the approximately $3 million in operational startup costs. On February 27th, the board has its first meeting. Senator Link does not attend. He does not attend for the first 4 months. The first months of a restoration are critical for the board of directors. In order to do effective fundraising, the board was given reports on the operating plan that clearly outlined 3 6-week seasons. They were given a report on the proposed balcony expansion and corporate and VIP seating. The board was given critical fundraising information regarding the marquee and vestibule design. The Founders Circle, which would be a critical fundraising tool, was formed. The case statement was distributed, clearly outlining the anchor season and the conceptual architectural plan. The naming rights program, a very effective fundraising tool, was described in great detail to the board. The amounts and their proposed sponsorship exchanges were clearly outlined in great detail. The board of directors' roles and responsibilities was distributed. The primary role of every board member was to participate in fundraising on behalf of the theater. A memorandum was distributed, explaining 4 full-time employees, the recommended volunteer structure, and the aggressive fundraising schedule. The restoration continues. By June 5th, 2003, Senator Link had attended only 6 of 14 board meetings. During those board meetings, every member was made aware that Nanette Shepardson was in negotiations with Abbott Laboratories discussing naming rights for the marquee and lobby, as was clearly outlined and approved by the board. By March of 2004, as opening day drew closer, the board had yet to raise any money to fund the operations and opening of the theater.
We are 2 years behind schedule in my mind. We screwed this whole thing for 2 years in my mind.
Without a quorum, Senator Link assumes the chairman position and begins to ask questions that he would have had the answers for had he attended the early critical meetings.
No one ever knew there was a health care plan. No one knew that there was anything that was being put on for all these employees. Who gave the authorization, the health plan? Who gave the authorization to do all these other things that were down at the Genesee, the expansion of the balcony, to expand anything? The original contract. The original plan? That's the original plan.
This is the one in the contract with GSI. Just like you asked me who authorized the extra seats. Well, that's in the city contract. Clearly part of the plan, clearly budgeted for, and in the contract, and the budget with GSI.
Nobody looked at it. You know, it was like Steve called me up and left a voicemail and said, the salaries that we put the 2 people on that were keeping temporary, actually we could do it lower because they're going to collect unemployment. And I'm calling, why are you collecting unemployment? When were we paying into that? I didn't know we were paying into it. We're a charitable organization. Most charitable organizations don't pay into unemployment.
Really?
Do they?
I think it's the law.
Yeah. I didn't know. So I didn't know. You know what I mean? But I didn't know.
In a recorded executive session, the board of directors discusses what to do. Senator Link still doesn't understand the problems. He tells the board that they need to raise $5 million to open the theater. He appears not to know that the original amount was $3 million. Shepardson had explained that after spending $32 million on the building and parking ramp, that this was a small price to pay for the economic engine the theater would become.
His thinking is that if we go that way of 100 or 50 things a year or 60 things a year, that we're gonna go broke. So how are we not gonna go broke?
Well, I gotta tell you right now, Bill, there ain't no way in hell we are gonna raise $5 million for just operating expense alone.
With no understanding of the operating plan, Senator Link begins to state wrong numbers as facts. He doesn't know the real numbers. No one on the board corrects him.
I'll tell you what, I will hang up my spikes in the Senate and become the ticket manager here because he's gonna make $150,000 a year.
The salary for that position had not changed from the beginning. It was in the original documents. It was $75,000.
No, and I know you wanted to do it right, but see, timing is everything, you know what I mean? And had I done it that time, I never would have got the $8 million from the city council. I know I wouldn't have. I know one thing I know is government. I know the way people think. I know the way if I would have laid those people off at that time, restructured at that time, and then went to that council would have been down my throat.
On April 29, 2004, after raising no significant funding in nearly 2 years, the board was scrambling. Now they began to look at Ray Shepherdson's operating plan as too expensive. Having not been paid for 6 months, Shepardson was understanding of their funding issues and offered to step out of the mix when it came to long-term programming. He fully intended to follow through the opening of the theater and the launching of the business plan, and then move on, as he had done after so many theaters before. Meanwhile, Abbott Laboratories called Nanette Shepardson and told her that her fundraising efforts were paying off. They were going to give a sizable donation to the Genesee Theater project. Terry Link, appearing not to know anything about the Shepardsons' efforts to secure funding, spoke to Abbott and blamed the Shepardsons for doing exactly what the board had approved in his absence.
Because what had happened is the Shepherdsons were committing the naming rights of the marquee to Abbott. They were having pictures in the hall of Abbott, Niles White, the Abbott family. They were having a room named after him. I'm sitting there and thinking, God, if somebody comes in here with $1 million donation, what am I supposed to do? Rename Genesee Street? And I stopped my fundraising for one simple reason. Until we get this mess straightened out, I'm not going to be making the phone calls to certain people that are waiting there to write checks to me.
A board of directors with no theater operations experience, chosen for their fundraising ability, and in 2 years had yet to raise any funds, decides to replace the one person that had not only run a theatrical enterprise, but whose operating plan actually drove the very design of the building they were restoring. As opening day approaches, and after spending $32 million, a board that doesn't even know what questions to ask scrambles to find a replacement. In 2 weeks.
Meet with them wherever you want. You can get somebody from other places. I don't care where we generate them. If you could come up with a decision in 2 weeks, we could call an emergency meeting in 2 weeks, have that meeting, make a decision, and boom, we could hold a meeting in my office in Lake Bluff, unbeknownst to what's going on here, so that there's not anybody knowing here.
We don't tell anybody, they'll never know.
In a secretly recorded executive session, the board is heard conspiring to lie to City Council by concocting a story that Ray Shepardson had resigned.
I'd like to just emphasize what Dave said, which is we did jump a huge hurdle tonight, and that is, Ray submitting his resignation.
We accept his resignation. We did not fire him. And we can accept it next week, 2 weeks from now. We accept his resignation.
Wait. He's going to change it. You know, he's going to withdraw that resignation. As a matter of fact, I thought he was withdrawing it.
Unacceptable. You know, I mean,
there's no resignation. We are assuming there really It's not a resignation until I see something in writing.
Under the circumstances that we...
You want him to stay?
But wait a minute.
Okay, that's a resignation.
That's right.
Okay, there's a motion to accept, and correct me, Harry, if I'm wrong, a motion to accept Ray Shephardson's resignation immediately, and we will pay him in full of what we owe him.
I would rather say that the board has approved his dismissal, period.
No, you're not firing him. You're not going to, what, are you going to fire him, and then we will have a PR battle.
If he comes back out and says, I never resigned, what does that make us look like?
No, he looks bad. He looks bad. It doesn't make us
We're all
look bad.
sitting here in...
We're you got everybody else running.
It would be Ray's credibility against everyone else's credibility in this room, and I don't have a problem with that.
Three people have been criticized no end, all over the place. And it disturbs me that this quality of people are getting this kind of treatment. The accusations are sort of that they didn't do their job or not doing their job. And what I have found out over there is that people aren't listening.
An attempt to rehire Ray Shepardson as an outside consultant passed in the Finance Committee, but lost in the full council. The lies, accusations, and distortion of the Friends of the Genesee Theater Board of Directors were what the council based their decision. This decision doomed the beautifully restored Genesee Theater to darkness more than 300 nights a year. Shepardson was heartbroken for Waukegan. In the newspaper articles about Ray's so-called resignation, Link continues to spin.
What the city of Waukegan owns in the Genesee Theater is an unbelievable tool, something that can, create an unbelievable, lifestyle downtown. That with just the right planning and the right programming, with regular performances on a regular basis, there could be people coming in and out of that theater and the shops and the restaurants and all that kind of business. When the theater first opened, you couldn't get near a restaurant in Waukegan, let alone some in Gurnee, for the nights there were performances. Now just take that and multiply it by 300. Why not? Everyone says, you hear people say, well, they can't. Why not? Why can't you do it? That's why we designed it the way we did. And it's heartbreaking to drive by there on a Saturday night and see nothing happening. It's heartbreaking to drive by there on a Friday night and see nothing happening. And when you have this unbelievable, thing sitting there that you can really use to the best of your advantage.
Ray Shepardson has since been awarded an honorary doctorate from Case Western Reserve University for his vision that has revitalized economies throughout the country. He was also honored for his vision with the President's Award from Playhouse Square. And he is also a recipient of the 2013 Governor's Award for Arts in Ohio. The Paramount Theater in Aurora, Illinois, is now using a proven Shepardson marketing model. The extreme offer of buy 2 shows and get 2 shows free for under $100 for shows that normally cost $75 to $85 each. And they've just announced their new season, having 4 shows that each run for 4 weeks, adding 128 performances of full-scale Broadway productions, bringing their event total to a record well over 200 a year. And they now have over 20,000 subscribers.
That, I said, you're talking to somebody that's been in politics for 30 years. We've spun everything in my lifetime. I said, we've made manure look good.